Thank you, Chair. Let's explore the impacts of early intervention in some detail. The National Audit Office report, the pressures on children's social care, states that local authorities have seen their overall real spending power reduced by 28.6% since 2010. Authorities have responded to this pressure by reducing spending on non-statutory children's services and increasing spending on statutory social work. Mr. Pemberton and Ms. Evans, Barnardo's and Children England have stated that cuts to non-statutory services such as children's centres, parenting programmes and early help are leading to an increased demand for statutory services. What is your evidence for this?
So, when in our evidence, we were particularly talking about the sheer volume of open access community provision, which we have seen disappear in the voluntary and community sector, rather than specifically what we would call early help programmes. We do believe that actually we do need to sit alongside each other, the trajectory of care numbers going up and the trajectory of cuts to early intervention. And while, of course, we've taken on board and looked at the NAO findings, that is a very simple and, I would suggest, a very simplistic snapshot of comparing children's centre closures and subsequent care numbers. But children's centres are a myriad of different things in the first place. So kind of the assumption that if children's centres had any preventative impact, then you would see it in the care numbers, I think, is oversimplified. But one of the ways in which open access community level activities have, if you like, been kind of hoisted by the wrong petard is by being held to an account for preventing things that don't happen later. And that is actually scientifically, statistically speaking, impossible to do. Okay. So they've been drawn into a world where we say, if you do something, can you prove that it didn't have any effect and that didn't happen because of you? And that's not possible. So it's been falling into a strange place, the justification of good, supportive social infrastructure at community level. So I don't know what I'm saying about that. I'm saying maybe I think that the early intervention yardstick is the wrong one to apply to what we're seeing as the impact of the loss of social infrastructure.
Mr. Pemberton, can you describe Barnardo's perspective in terms of the evidence that you've got?
It's actually very similar to what Kathy's described. I mean, I think it's too early to know the impact of children's centres, the children's centres closures are having, to draw a direct line from one to the other. But this is also about the change in the need that's out there, the change of what's going on in children and young people's lives and the challenges they're facing today. So it's a more complicated relationship between the two. But what we can absolutely point to through the children's centres and family hubs that Barnardo's works is we know that the people coming to us have more complex needs. They are. I won't kind of reiterate the things I said before, but they are coming to us with more complex levels of need and issues that would have been better addressed sooner in the process. But they're actually often only coming forward when they're at a crisis point. So this is based on the evidence of the children and young people we're working with and what our caseworkers see day to day.
Okay, Ms. England, in terms of Ms. Evans, sorry, in terms of Children England, you say that what makes non-statutory services so accessible and so valuable to all sorts of families and surrounding communities is also what makes them difficult to measure and evaluate. Can you just elaborate a bit further on that and explain to us how we might evaluate such interventions better?
So to give you some examples of things that I think I'm particularly aware of, many of the kind of what we're calling there social infrastructure rather than particularly early help, but certainly at community level, that people can join in with, gain a sense of bonds and friendships and support networks within their community, feel known, seen, belonging. I mean, firstly, it increases the range of contact points, as was being described, but also that's actually one of the ways that many families meet their own needs and each other's. So whether that's open active play schemes, babysitting circles, peer groups, support groups that members of communities hold, community halls and all of the activities that might take place there of a whole range of different kinds. Those are not modalities that are either assessing and admitting someone and then tracking their outcomes in the first place. It's not casework. It's not saying you have a problem, did we make it any better? And secondly, a lot of the time that it is collective, so it's accepting and encouraging everyone to join in. So you're not actually monitoring an individual pathway, and some people may use it all the time, some people may never use it. So just on a modality basis, it's not very easy to fit into the paradigm that most of our services currently have to meet, which is prove your impact on children's outcomes and the financial impact of achieving that. So they've struggled in that area, but particularly because we're often talking about small local voluntary action, very low turnover. Most of them are below the commissioning threshold or zone of interest for children's services. And they wouldn't describe themselves necessarily as children's services, but they are part of the infrastructure that families need and want in their area. A library won't be described or commissioned as a children's service, but it may be doing an extraordinary amount of work with learning needs and reading and encouragement and supporting parents. So it's that, and those kind of provisions in a local area may be very financially fragile, irrespective of whether or not they got any local authority money for children's services or whether it's being withdrawn. So, you know, for a community group that's been meeting regularly, if the place where they hold those meetings puts their room hire up by £10, it might break them. Okay. And it might just mean that they can't do it.
And I do think these kind of universal non-stigmatising services which are open to communities, they have, we deliver, we're about 140,000 people we thought last year through Barnardo's Children's Centres. They play a vital role in identifying and responding to emerging problems as early as possible. This is early intervention in action. This is how you see things much sooner and you have the ability to kind of address them, and it's why they're so important, but they're difficult to measure.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. And in terms of a recent report from the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Children, they found that social workers and teachers were seeing a shift to later and more complex interventions. In fact, 83% of local authorities are attesting to that. But let's look into your own submissions. You raise concerns about a move away from universal provision towards a more targeted intervention. Is there any evidence, Ms. Ashley, in terms of whether this leads to worse outcomes overall?
Sorry, is it me?
Yeah, Ms. Ashley, yeah. Ms. Ashley, yeah.
Sorry. I think that, what we, can I slightly sort of shift your question a little bit in terms of, at the moment, just take an example of family and friends care, okay, of children who are being raised by wider family. If they step in early before the child is looked after, then that child's access or right to support is severely less. In fact, it's almost negligible compared to those children who have been looked after. So at the moment, the way that we have constructed children's services is that actually if you do try and avoid a child ending up in the care system, if you try and avoid a child having to be subject to child protection system, the support infrastructure around you is often pretty minimal. And that has become more problematic as you've seen cuts to preventative early intervention services, so those relatives then really struggling when those children need, for example, therapeutic support. And also it's really problematic because of some of the benefit reforms where we've seen, for example, family and friends carers subject to the benefit cap, and therefore they're actually facing very severe poverty. So that's just a small illustration, if you like, of some of the difficulties of the way that we currently structure the system.
Okay. Any further comments before I draw that to a close? Yeah?
I think I would just want to encourage and add, so we certainly do believe in the value of early intervention, in the sense that I think all of our cliches...
Universal provision. You mean?
Well, in the sense that, prevention is better than cure. But it's really about saying how promptly can we meet a need or a desire for help. And that in some degree we've ended up over-managerialising the concept of early intervention, so that it's become narrowed down to very intensive high-cost programmes that are intended to change the life path of individuals. Mm-hmm. That, when I started in the sector, in my career, early intervention just meant having a rich range of services that were appropriate to different kinds of need. And perhaps I think we might have overcomplicated that proposition and then been held for failure to prove it.